Right, I think we might make a bit of a start so anybody else can join us if they wish. Right, well, good afternoon. Thank everybody for joining us today. Anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Jo Chamberlain. I'm the Heritage and Participation Officer for the Atkinson on Lord Street. Thanks for coming along today. This is our Objects of the Month talk, which we used to run in-house, and obviously due to the current climate, we've moved them online. But thank you for coming along and seeing us today. So, quickly reiterate, what we're going to do is put you on mute and your videos will be off for the duration of the talk. If you do wish to send any messages through or ask any questions, please send them through the chat option. And what we'll do is Jill will take a look at that at the end. So, without further ado, today's talk is by Jill Newsham. She is from the University of Central Lancashire. Anybody who has been to the talks at the Atkinson will no doubt have seen Jill do her wonderful talks again in the past. And indeed, she used to be one of our volunteers. Are you still on the books as a volunteer?
I'm still on the books. I'm still a volunteer. This is my volunteer.
Excellent. Yeah. So, we thought during the current climate and due to all the things that's been happening lately in Southport, it might be quite nice to take a bit of a nostalgic view of some of the former grandeur of Southport, and indeed one of the things that Southport was really known for, which was its shopping. So today's talk is Take 3 Shops, Boothroyds, Broadbents and Bobbies. And over to you, Jill.
Right, thanks, Jo. Thank you very much. Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me today to talk about 3 of the most interesting shops in Southport. I was lucky enough to visit all of them in their glory days, and I also worked for one of them for a short period of time. Now, normally for a talk like this, I'd spend my time deep in the archives of the Crosby Library, checking my facts, verifying dates, but due to lockdown restrictions, I've not been able to do this. And unfortunately, for the same reason, I only managed to get access to the Boothroyds archive this week. So unfortunately, most of that has been too late to include in this talk. So today, my talk is based on material available to me online, as well as I'd like to say thank you to Angela Robinson, who is the youngest granddaughter of one of the founding families of retailing in Southport. So thank you very much to her. And also to Dr. J.H. Porter of Exeter University for his work on Boothroyds. And of course, Jo, who's helped me out. My thanks go to all of them. Right. So let's go. Right. Well, we all have memories of our favourite shops where we went perhaps as a child at Christmas to visit Santa's Grotto or for afternoon tea as a special treat. I know I was always on my best behaviour. If you grew up or visited Southport, there were really only 3 big shops: Boothroyds, Broadbents and Bobbies. Now that was later Marhsall and Snellgrove's, then Debenhams, but 3Bs sounded like a better title for the talk, so forgive me, but I will talk about all of them in turn. The history of department stores, they've been around for about 200 years. And I know from the way things are changing on the high street, they're definitely struggling at the moment. But before they disappear, I think it's good to record and remember the good times. And some of the amazing stories behind them and the part they played in all our lives. The first large department store was founded in the city of Paris by Astrid Bohor in 1852. It was called Bon Marché, meaning good shop or good deal in French. And like so many shops, it started small and expanded to the size you can see in the picture. And this was by the 1890s. Of course, Britain followed the trends, principally led by William Whiteley, known as the universal provider. They weren't so much called department stores then, who was a pioneer of retailing and the shopping experience as we know it. All over the country, department stores based on the French and later the American model opened. Think in London of Selfridges, Liberty's, Harrods, and then in the larger cities and towns in the provinces, think of Lewis's of Liverpool, Howells of Cardiff, Jenner's of Edinburgh, Brown's of Chester, etc., etc. And each one with a history of its own, often linked to a single family down the generations. Well, what was good enough for Paris was obviously good enough for Southport, but it did take a little bit of time to catch up. This is an early picture of Lord Street looking north, and you can see there's still plenty of little shops. It's probably around the 1830s this, but they were what we would call perhaps specialist shops. The draper, the silk mercer, the pharmacist or chemist, the bookseller, the boot and shoemaker. In a lot of cases, they were also making the products that they sold on site. And the shopkeeper and his family and his staff often lived above the premises. So why did things change? Well, briefly, there are four main reasons. There were more people. The permanent population of Southport grew year on year as the town developed from as a resort in the 1880s. There was more money. The emerging middle classes had more what we would call disposable income to come on holiday to Southport and spend their money while they were here. There were more products to sell, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the fact that Britain was part of a global empire. There were more things available to buy. Women's fashion especially became more available to women of the growing middle classes, or the middling sort as they were sometimes called. There were new forms of transport. The coming of the railways in the 1850s meant that people could travel further from their homes, some for the first time in their lives. And of course, later on, motor cars made things even easier. So the first department store in Southport was Boothroyds, by a long way, actually. It was founded in 1823 as a draper and cabinet maker and operated until 1972, when it was absorbed by Broadbents, but more of that later. It traded as Boothroyds as one shape or another for about 149 years. The story, though, begins with William Jolly, who operated a small draper's business from a cottage, and it's roughly where the Atkinson now stands, Richmond Hill. Drapers were often the largest store in most towns because they carried such diverse stocks of mainly bought-in goods, and this allowed the business to expand more rapidly. Mr. Jolly started as a linen and woolen draper, but soon expanded into piece goods, haberdashery and fancies. In 1833, he moved to larger premises at 145 Lord Street, but most importantly, in 1834, he employed a new assistant to help with the shop by the name of Samuel Boothroyd. Samuel Boothroyd was born in Pontefract in 1814, where his father, the Reverend Dr. Boothroyd, was a Congregationalist minister. The Reverend Doctor preached in Churchtown and visited Southport, where he was acquainted with the Reverend George Greatbatch, Reverend George Greatbatch, who was an important figure in the development of Southport at the time, and who in turn knew William Jolly. Young Samuel Boothroyd had worked in Bradford as an apprentice draper, but the foul air was not good for his health, and having already lost a brother to consumption, or TB as we call it, it was decided he should move to Southport, where he was apprenticed to William Jolly, a fellow Congregationalist. And this is a nice picture of Boothroyds. It's quite difficult to find pictures of Boothroyds, actually, without trees or cars in front. This was a lovely sketch done by Ken Rumley. Okay. This is a picture of the Congregational Chapel on Chapel Street, roughly where Costa now stands. And this is where they worshipped. And it's true to say that their faith was very important to the first retailing families of Southport. By 1835, Samuel Boothroyd had entered into a partnership with William Jolly. Jolly was the major shareholder, putting in £700 of capital to Samuel Boothroyd's 400. But interestingly, the profits were equally divided. And incidentally, both men also married two of the daughters of the Reverend George Greatbatch, making the ties even stronger. In around 1844, Jolly and Boothroyd moved again to 147 Lord Street, roughly where the Burton Arcade was later built. The new premises sounded very impressive, and I quote, with a dome, gallery and pillars, with terracotta capitals and bases, lofty plate glass windows and internal fittings worthy of a drawing room. It must have been a sight to see. In 1845, William Johnson Rimmer, who was a pupil of William Jolly's Sunday school class in the Congregational Chapel on Chapel Street, joined the business as an apprentice draper, and he later became a partner. And you can see his name is on the building. It's on that rather wonderful horse-drawn carriage and the early motor vehicle in this picture. This is an early picture of the millinery department in Boothroyds, and this is a wonderful example of a page turner, branded Boothroyd, Sons and Rimmer, and it was possibly used as a page turner perhaps for a sample book, or less likely given away to favoured customers, but it is a rare survivor. In 1859-60, the premises expanded into what's the current site at 151 to 157 Lord Street, and extensive improvements were made. The Lord Street facade was improved, the internal fittings remodelled, and a furniture department, room for a hearse and staff living quarters, hopefully not next to each other, were added to the rear of the building. By 1868, they advertised themselves as drapers, silk mercers, cabinet makers, upholsterers, carpet warehousemen, and Venetian blind makers. So it was turning into a real department store. In 1876, the Southport Visitor gave a long description of the workshops behind the shop. All of that is sadly gone now, but the furniture warehouse lay behind the apprentices' house. Here, rough timber was turned into finished furniture. Additionally, here were workshops for making up carpets and for making Venetian blinds. And this picture shows a couple of examples. The sideboard, which is described as exceptional quality, circa 1891, and that was recently offered for sale at auction, and it's marked Boothroyds, and also a burgundy silk dress from 1879-90 made on the premises, and this is an example of the type of sewn label that would have been inside of the clothes. But I think you'll agree, beautiful pieces of craftsmanship. You can't really talk about Boothroyds as a business without mentioning some of the other areas that Samuel Boothroyd was involved in. He was an active local Liberal politician and played a part in the establishment of the Winter Gardens and the Southport Pier. He was director of the West Lancs Railway Company and of the Palace Hotel and Hydro Company, not to mention the Victoria Baths, the Victoria Hotel on the Promenade. On the incorporation of Southport in 1867, he was elected as a councillor. He served as deputy mayor and then on two separate periods as mayor. And he was involved in the building of the infirmary and the new market hall. He was a member and treasurer of the Southport Improvement Commission, and he took every opportunity to promote and improve Southport, thus attracting visitors, and most of which did benefit his business. But he did this also at the same time as running a successful department store business. Luckily, Samuel Boothroyd and Sarah, his first wife, had 9 children, 7 sons and 2 daughters. Benjamin, William Jolly and Alfred Edward eventually joined the business as partners. He died in 1886 at his home Worley House on Duke Street, and his funeral was a massive event. He was an absolutely fascinating man, and I really think he probably, well, definitely deserves a talk in his own right. One of the main ways that shops communicate to their customers is by advertising. And the adverts that survive give us a valuable insight, not only to what they were actually selling at the time, but more importantly, how they wanted to portray themselves to the world. I've not been able to find many examples of Boothroyd's advertising, probably because I can't get into the archives, but this was a rather charming advertisement, which I think Joe used to advertise the talk from 1832. Sorry, 1932, that's better. But it's just so beautifully written in the flowery language of the time. And it's also quite a rare one because it's actually got the date on it. As I said, Boothroyd's continued under various members of the family. Exactly who and when needs more research until 1972, a total of 149 years, when it was bought by Broadbents, becoming Broadbents and Boothroyds. But in 1990, it was leased to Owen Owen, the Liverpool department store company, who then developed financial problems of their own and so leased the building to Beales. And it was as Beales that it closed in 2020. I think there's a lot more to be discovered about the Boothroyds, but that is for further research. Sadly, it remains closed today, and this is just a selection of photographs. I apologise, I couldn't find a really good one of Broadbents and Boothroyds, but I like the idea that this was a picture of the Broadbents Boothroyds team. But quite often they're difficult to see because there's trees in front or traffic, and they didn't seem to take the photograph. But anyway, the store is now closed. So now we move on to the second of our shops, Broadbents. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned Bon Marché, the first Parisian department store, but Southport also had its own Bon Marché, which were the beginnings of Broadbents on Chapel Street. It was established in 1870 by Mr. C. Stidston Broadbents. Again, I don't know much about him, and he's the subject of more research. And the shop traded as Bon Marché until it became Broadbents in 1896. But 2 years later, as a young man of 24, Arthur Edwin Mercy arrived in Southport and took up the post of company secretary at Broadbents, but more of him later. You'll see from this drawing from 1900 that Bon Marché only occupied the central section of the block of buildings that eventually became Broadbents. And if my thing works, I will try it. I should be able to. Might work. You can just about see him. You can see Bon Marché there. I'll get it to work. Yeah. You can just see Bon Marché. Okay, let's see if I can get back again. This is where the fun starts. Yes. The corner section of the building was originally built as a high-class tea and coffee merchant by the name of Barrett and Birtwistle. It was a beautiful building with towers and turrets, and ornamental brick and stonework, some of which remains. If you stand in Chapel Street and look, you can see that some of it is still there. It's rumoured, and I've been talking to Joe earlier on about Southport during the Second World War. It's rumoured that it lost its towers due to bomb damage during the Second World War, but I've not been able to verify it, and I think it's really just a nice story, really. Barrett and Birtwistle, unfortunately, only lasted until the First World War, and in 1919, the whole block became Broadbents, as you can see from this picture. The business prospered, and the three buildings were brought together, formed one big department store. And at various times, premises were added in the Cambridge Arcade side and also into Corporation Street. The thing that's sort of gone now are the verandas. You can see there are the verandas along the front, right along the corner, but they've been modernised, and the old wrought iron ones have disappeared now. This is an example of an early advertisement, perhaps from the 1890s. The fact is to note that it really was a department store, or a store of departments, with an in-store chemist, menswear, a department selling foreign fancy goods, and Oriental productions. Perhaps that's Southport's answer to the aesthetic movement, I don't know. But you can see down at the bottom Mr. C. Stidston Broadbent as chairman and managing director. However, the driving force behind this period of expansion was really Arthur Edwin Mercy, as we don't hear much about Mr. Stidston Broadbent from then on. A.E. Mercy joined Broadbents as company secretary in 1898, and by 1903 he had a seat on the board. He then became general manager, and finally by 1914 he was managing director. He was one of those remarkable men like Samuel Boothroyd, who deserves far more time than this talk can devote to him. He was born in Birmingham in 1873 and orphaned at an early age. He didn't have an easy start in life, starting work in a local draper's at 13 and a half. He also joined the Congregational Church and was a great example of the zest of late Victorians for self-improvement. He soon became a main shareholder, and the business prospered under his management. These are rare pictures from the store's ladies department in around 1910. And as you can see, it's beautifully fitted out with standing displays. There's a rather lovely one of a skirt in the middle with a train. It's got cabinets, glass display cabinets and stained glass windows, very stylish light fittings, and rugs underfoot. I should imagine it would have been a pleasure to shop there. This is another view of what seems to be what is the millinery department, which at this period was a very important profit-making department in any store. Elaborate ladies' hats were all the rage, and again you can see how beautifully the department is fitted out. You know, note the chair to sit and try the hats on and generally relax while you made your purchases. Just a word about living in. Living in, which happened at both Boothroyds and Broadbents right through until after the First World War, meant that members of staff, both male and female, living on the shop premises. It seems very strange to us now, but back then it was common practice in retailing. And as you can see from this cartoon of the period, the different sexes were strictly regulated and strictly segregated. In 1908 at Broadbents, girls could serve their 2-year apprenticeship, during which time they received board and lodging, but no washing. I think that meant they had to pay for their own laundry. Not only that, their parents had to provide pocket money and a black dress for the girls. By 1913, they received £1 per week for the first year and 2 6pence in the second year. At Boothroyd's, a similar system existed, but that was spread over 3 years. If a shop girl, as they were called at that point, did meet somebody and wished to get married, she had to give up her job. In the early days before the First World War, married women were not really employed, but there were exceptions for widows. However, both firms took a very paternal attitude to their management, the management of their staff, supported by their Christian beliefs. And for the most part, their staff were well treated by their employers. Staff loyalty was very high, and special events and dinners were held to celebrate both national and family events. These are just a couple of examples of Broadbents' enterprising use of advertising. The first advert is for Lifeboat Surge, a material that anyone braving the coastal climate of Southport would be foolish not to have their garments made out of it. And indeed it sets out all the benefits of it, you know, why you need to have a costume made of it. The second, which I love, is a more direct "Shop at Broadbent" slogan on the bridge at the now lost Woodvale station. These are a couple more examples of advertisements for the autumn winter from the 1960s. Note the cracker teas, which I think is rather good on the one on the right hand side in the restaurants. And the store, it's the store with car parks, which I love. Not sure where they were, but it's the store with car parks. This is a couple more different types of advertising that Broadbents designed through the years. I think the bridal one is absolutely beautiful. I don't know who designed it, but it's lovely. A.E. Mercy remained involved in the business until he was in his 80s. But as time went on, other members of his family, mainly the peddler side of the family, took over the day-to-day running of the business, as well as their involvement in Wayfarers Arcade. But that really is another story for another day. I also came across this picture, which was taken in Broadbents in the furniture department in March 1983. I don't know very much about it, but it would be lovely if anybody has any information who these people are. I don't know, and why the ladies are wearing such fabulous looks like furnishing fabric dresses, but if you could supply me with some details, I'd love to know. Anyway, there's two stores, Boothroyds and Broadbents, have been running in parallel since the 1970s, but in 1990 they were leased to Owen Owen, and when they developed financial problems, Broadbents was leased to British Home Stores, who also bought the land, whilst Beales took over the Boothroyd side. Unfortunately, BHS went to administration in April 2016 and the store closed. The latest news is that in 2020, the building was sold for £500,000 and is set to become apartments and perhaps some retail units, which, if you think about it, is going back to the way it was in the 1830s. And now for the third and final of our shops, Debenhams, as it was before it closed last year. This is a very early photograph of Lord Street looking north. This end of Lord Street was the last to be developed for retailing. And as you can see, what is now Casa Italia on the corner of Boll Street, and if I can highlight again, that's Boll Street just going down there, and that's Casa at that corner there. But as I say, it was the last bit to be developed, and I'll click back so you can see again. Debenhams, where Debenhams is now, was occupied by a private house called Somerset House, a large detached property with a double carriage drive and gardens to front and rear. And it's that bank of trees that you can see jutting out into Lord Street, roughly in the middle of the picture. The house is actually behind those trees, and beyond that is the Bold Arms Hotel as it was then, which had been there from 1832. It's an unusual shot of Lord Street because you don't see photographs pointing north. They tend to be from the monument looking south, or so this is quite a rare one. Sometime in the 1890s, and I've been unable to research exactly when as yet the house was demolished, a row of shops was built, making Lord Street a continuous row of shops and businesses on the seaward side. The early businesses consisted of Gregory and Gleave, which you can see a picture of the interior there, a milliner, and they were there in 1900 and occupied 557 Lord Street. The Imperial Cafe, or the Imperial Tea Rooms, Turner's, was at 553 to 555 in 1906, and the wonderfully named Victor Fedone was a hairdresser who occupied 563. Finally, things changed again, and John T. Nuttall moved from the corner of Leicester Street, the old Pizza Express or Pizza Hut, one of those, on the corner of Leicester Street, and he occupied most of the site until 1920. And you can see he was he dealt in fur. He was a pelterer, and also a funeral director. So there was this row of shops, and I think Nuttall gradually, his business gradually expanded to take in the others. And he had quite a few different departments, and he was an agent for Burberry waterproof garments, which is quite interesting at that time. I also wanted to mention another business listed at 539 Lord Street, and this was J.M. Falk and Company, cabinet maker. Although his business was more in Stanley Street, which runs parallel to Lord Street, the Lord Street address was very important to him. When you're walking down Lord Street sometime in the future, stand in front of Debenhams and look at the left-hand side. You'll see an alley, and if you look down there, you can still see this building. He must have been proud of his business, as you can also find this plaque on the wall of what was his warehouse in Stanley Street. This whole building and what we think was his shop was absorbed into Debenhams loading bay, but quite a lot of the internal plan still remains, particularly the rooms with the bay windows on the first and second floor, which remain largely unchanged. Anyway, in 1920-21, everything changed when Bobbies of Margate came to Southport and bought the entire plot, as well as the buildings in Stanley Street, and began an extensive redevelopment of the whole site to form one large department store based on the stores that they already owned on the south coast. Bobby & Co was founded in Margate in 1900. They specialised in seaside stores with branches all along the south coast. They established themselves in seaside towns with a high-class holiday trade as well as local trade, and Southport was really their only northern seaside store. They did have Leamington Spa, but obviously that's not seaside. This is a very, very rare image of the 1920s when the store was branded as Bobby & Co, and you can just see the Bobby & Co name on the veranda. Let me see if I can make it any bigger to show you. Whoops, no, that's not done it. But you can just see up on the veranda there, very faintly, it does say Bobby & Co. Okay. But if anybody knows of any other images of Bobby & Co, I would love to see them. This is the original company that was founded in Margate in 1887, and it was bought as an established business by Mr. Frederick Bobby in 1900. As you can see, expansion followed, and they moved to Bournemouth, Cliftonville, Eastbourne, etc. And there's Southport, and of course they were in Torquay as well. A great deal of money was spent on building the Southport store, with beautiful interiors, though it's difficult to tell exactly when specific features were added, as no records exist that I'm aware of. Worth a mention from this period is the large glass dome and the classical staircase, both of which remain in situ today. As in all department stores, the restaurant was a very important part of the business, and Bobby's was no exception. This is a picture from the 20s or 30s with an advert from the period, one of the few specifically produced for the Southport store. You can see the dome. Again, I'll try and highlight this. You can see the dome in the centre surrounded by the classical pillars, but the difference from now is that this was actually open to the floor below, and it must have flooded light into the ground floor. There were orchestral performances, and I believe it was also open in the evening for special events and functions when the store was closed. The staircase I showed you in the previous slide was part of a separate entrance which led from the right-hand side of the Lord Street frontage directly into the restaurant, thus avoiding the shop floor. Being part of a group of stores, Bobbies could invest in advertising far more heavily than a single family-run firm. And I wanted to show you some of their adverts from the mid-1920s, all of which mention Southport. These were commissioned from the famous railway poster artist F. Gregory Brown in 1924, and I think they're particularly stylish. These first two are very much in the Art Deco style, which was so fashionable at the time. And you can see the list of stores at the bottom, and there's Southport on both of those. I didn't find these, I haven't found these in the Visitor, but it'd be interesting. I think probably they were a bit, I don't know for the Visitor, but I might be wrong, they might be there. Here you see some examples, some more examples, again by F. Gregory Brown. And you'll see, again, Southport listed on all of them. I think the middle one's my favourite, Evening Wraps. And I think it's especially evocative of the theatres and the nightlife in Southport at that period. These posters have now become pieces of art in their own right, and they're rare, and they can sell for up to £3,000 at auction. A good example. In 1927, the founder of the firm, Mr. Frederick Bobby, retired and sold the entire group to Debenhams. His son remained as chairman of the Bobbies Group, and they continued to trade as Bobbies and even opened some further stores. Most people, however, will remember this store as Marhsall and Snellgrove's, and this is where it becomes complicated. Because in 1919, Debenhams had worked with Marhsall and Snellgrove's before buying them out in 1924. They continued to use the Marhsall and Snellgrove's name, particularly in their northern stores, so that sometime between 1927 and 38, they changed the name of the Southport store from Bobby & Co to Marhsall and Snellgrove's. This is a picture of Marhsall and Snellgrove's in the late 40s or early 50s. Marhsall and Snellgrove, even though it was owned by Debenhams, regarded itself as a separate family of stores, as this small history book it produced in 1950 demonstrates. Strangely, there's no reference to Debenhams at all in the book. It was extremely proud of its long history and its place amongst other great retailers in London, such as Harrods and Selfridges. Marhsall and Snellgrove's was founded in 1837 in Vere Street in London, but by 1951, it had branches in Manchester, Birmingham, Harrogate, Leicester, Leeds, Scarborough, York, Sheffield, Bradford, as well as its massive flagship on Oxford Street, and of course, Southport. Marhsall and Snellgrove's was a famous brand and a well-recognised name. I remember my mum having hats and clothes delivered in boxes like these. I think she hoped that the neighbours were watching when the delivery arrived. In those days, a lot of things were sold on what they called apro, which meant that you could order something and it would be delivered. You tried it on and returned it to the store or bought it, usually on account. The hat boxes are now vintage items and can cost about £40 on eBay for a good example. And this is a wonderful example of a Marhsall and Snellgrove hand-sewn label on a garment. They also use corporate adverts, like these two for knitting patterns in the 40s and 50s. You will notice that unlike Bobby, they were all northern stores, so they sort of grouped the stores together. No mention of Oxford Street, which seemed to be treated as a separate identity for advertising purposes. There are a great many adverts for Oxford Street, but not many exist for the provincial stores. Having said that, this is a beautiful example of a group advert for Rain Shoes, which lists the Southport store. I think it's really lovely. It's one of my favourites. This is a picture that some of you may remember, I do, of the Marhsall Snellgrove restaurant. It looked like this until into the 70s. You can see the central dome remains. Again, if I try and highlight it. But it's now being filled in. And you can see this is all shop floor here. And the space has been filled by a huge candelabra, light, which I think was there for quite a few years. It's still a waitress service restaurant with white linen tablecloths and silver monogrammed tea and coffee pots and cutlery, which some may remember. For me as a child, it was a special treat to be taken to Marhsall's for afternoon tea. And I can remember the models or mannequins who used to walk through the restaurant from time to time, modelling the clothes for sale. And they actually served wonderful cream cakes as well. The store finally changed its name and branding to Debenhams in the mid-1970s. The customers complained that the quality of the brand would be lost when it changed from Marhsall Snellgrove, not realising that Debenhams had actually owned it from the beginning. This is a picture of some of the Debenhams management and regional team in the 1970s. The gentleman fourth from the left and slightly to the back was the first Debenhams store director, as they were then called, Cyril Beecham. Although it's only a small store in the expanding Debenhams group, Southport was regarded as a training store. In almost 50 years it traded as Debenhams, more than 30 store managers. There were more than 30 store managers or store directors, a lot of whom went on to run larger stores around the country, including the Oxford Street store, a flagship. In 1985, Debenhams was bought by the Burton Group, and in 2003 it was acquired by Baroness Retail Limited, then listed on the London Stock Exchange in 2006. These are some of the more recent pictures of the window and department store merchandising. I think that was, it was a Sex in the City promotion. Debenhams became known for its discounting policy. Mega days and 24-hour spectaculars were extremely popular with customers, but not necessarily with other retailers. There always seemed to be a sale on. And they even arranged a free bus from Chapel Street station to the store, so they didn't miss any opportunities. The restaurant continued to flourish, more or less where it had always been, moved slightly. But it underwent several changes and refurbishments. But the big difference was the change to self-service in the early 1980s. No more silver service with the coming of the cappuccino, but it was still a very popular place to meet right up until it closed. Finally, sadly, the switch to online shopping and crippling high street rents took their toll, and sadly Debenhams closed in January 2020 as part of initial restructure. The remaining group of 150 plus stores went into administration later in 2020. The building remains empty, awaiting redevelopment. As with Boothroyds and Broadbents, it was for the most part a happy place to work where lasting friendships were made. In fact, I met and married my husband while we were both working there. Many people have happy memories of these three stores and the parts they played in their lives, whether it was choosing their wedding dress, shopping for their first home, or even buying for their first grandchildren, or just meeting friends for a cup of tea. The shops of Lord Street and Chapel Street have adapted and reinvented themselves many times over in the past 200 years, whatever the circumstances, and I am sure and I hope that they will continue to do so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill. I mean, it is really sad, isn't it, to look back on the days that was. But it was interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday who used to work at Beales, and they were quite upbeat about it in a way, because they were saying that one of the things they hope is that everybody's kind of way of thinking had changed over the years. So everybody's got really lazy. Everybody's more than happy to sit at home and doing their ordering while they're sitting on the couch. But then we've been through this pandemic and everybody's now sick to death of seeing four walls. So people seem to be kind of hoping that it's going to revert back a bit, you know, that people are going to now want to go out, want to go shopping, make it into an event again, which we can only hope, can't we? Because it would be lovely to see Lord Street looking that way again.
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
Right, I'm just going to quickly go through what we've got coming up to give Jill a chance to look at any questions. If you have got any questions, feel free to type them up. And also, if you have something that you want to pass on to Jill, you can contact the Atkinson. You can see the details on the website and we will pass them on to her. So the next talk is actually on the 12th of May at 1 o'clock, and it's entitled Galcoffs and the Secret Life of Pembroke Place, which is a talk by Dr. Liz Stewart of National Museums, Liverpool. The talk's actually going to be quite interesting because Pembroke Place is one of those places in Liverpool where it was, you know, the working class houses, which were kind of based around a courtyard where everybody shared a toilet and huge families all together in a very small space. Pembroke Place kind of survived for a very long time. And when the area was being redeveloped, Liverpool Museum stepped in and recorded it, did a lot of work on recording memories and things, and rescued what was the butchers, which was Galcoffs. So if you go to Museum of Liverpool Life on the seafront, they've actually got the frontage is actually on display there. And the family Galcoffs has actually got quite a connection with Southport as well, so that's our connection. So that's 12th of May at 1 o'clock, and that's a free talk. And the talk after that one, the talk before that one, is on the 5th of May at 7 p.m. And it's a portable antiquities scheme, so that's our Ancient Worlds talk. And this is by Heather Beaton, again from Liverpool Museum. Now, that talk's going to be looking at what the portable antiquities scheme is. And if you've not encountered it before, it's basically who you get in touch with if you find something in your back garden. And they've got this huge database and they record everything, and it's one of those places that people will look at, and then if they find like little kind of collections of objects turning up in an area, then it's usually an indication that there might be something bigger going on, so it can lead to like further research and things. So Heather's actually the fans liaison officer for the scheme, and she's going to be talking about what the scheme is, what they do, how you can access it, and also some of the absolutely fascinating things that they found over the years. And indeed her role actually covers Cheshire, Greater Manchester and Merseyside, so it's quite a huge area that they cover as well. Jill, have you got any questions that you want to answer?
There's a couple actually, but they've been very kind. People have been very kind in answering their own here. I didn't have a struggle finding much out about William Jolly, but thank you. Who was it? Beryl Jones. She said that William Jolly died relatively young and he had no children. So thank you for that. It's all bits in a jigsaw. He wasn't bought out. His widow remarried and retained an interest in the business. So that was stuff I couldn't check out, you see. So thank you. It's supplying stuff. But if you've got any memories, can you let the Atkinson know, because it would be good to try and keep this, because we're in a bit of a position at the moment where they've closed down these stores, and things go out of mind and then they get developed and people forget things. So it would be good if you've got any memories, if we could keep them, keep it going. And any promotional stuff, even if you could just take a picture of it, would be good. Because that was the stuff that got thrown away, and I've got pictures of Debenhams, particularly attics full of stuff that was cleared out and it's gone forever, which is sad. And you can't trace it, don't know where it's gone, and so on and so forth.
No, I mean, it's kind of the whole thing about how Southport used to be viewed as well, especially Lord Street, because I remember somebody telling me a story that this lady was saying when she was a little girl, when her and her sister used to be brought to Southport on days out, first thing they wanted was an ice cream as kids. And they were saying so they'd leg it up, get an ice cream, and then the mum would make them walk really slowly because they had to eat the ice cream before they went onto Lord Street, because it was like not the done thing to be seen eating actually on Lord Street.
Yeah.
So how things have changed.
It did. And Saturday afternoon was the time where you went shopping.
Yeah.
And then paraded, you were in your best clothes and you paraded down Lord Street, which is really weird for us to think about now.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen, does it? But anyway, it's there's a lot more to tell about it, and it would be good to capture it. So if you could help,
Yes.
great.
Yeah, absolutely, thoroughly agree. Right, so thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and we hope to see you all again soon. And thank you, Jill, so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.